This is Breaking Down Security. I'm Brian Brake. Hello, Mr. Betcher. How are you doing?
Hello. I'm here.
Okay. Well, before we get started, you did your Hackformers talk last week. So how did that go?
It was well received, and I apparently did good. So yeah, it was a friendly crowd.
We should. Well, a lot of good people there in Austin with Hackformers and with ISSA and those folks. So it'll be interesting. Maybe we should have a podcast on how to do a talk, because obviously you had to do some prep work for that and had to come up with a topic. So maybe you do a quick 20 minutes on how to do those kinds of things.
I'll see if I can come up with something.
All right, cool.
Although I'm no expert on giving talks. In fact, I'm probably the weakest one around on how to give a presentation.
I highly doubt that.
And that's why I did it. I wanted to, I'm weak on presentation skills. You need that for your job, in InfoSec, present to management, yada, yada. And so I was like, this is a great opportunity for me to get out there and, force myself to do a talk and, practice that way.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. So, we're kind of neglecting our guest. Let's bring him in here. We've had him on at least a couple of times. He's always very entertaining when he's on because he's very opinionated and he knows a little bit about malware research. He's a great hater of the Windows operating system because he used to work for said company at one time. And welcome back to the show, Mr. Gough. Michael Gough, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you, gents.
Right on. So this is gonna reach into territory that I'm a little I'm on the periphery of. So I'm going to have to put in a disclaimer that the opinions that Mr. Betcher and I and Michael are not opinions of our respective companies in the past, present, or future, and all the opinions are ours and ours alone. So having said that, and making sure I don't have any resume-generating events, maybe we could talk about a little bit about what you're doing now, Mr. Gough, with your website, malwarearchaeology.com.
Yeah, well, Malware Archaeology is the idea that comes from back in the day when I was in college. My minor was archaeology. I love malware, and what do we do when we dissect malware is we're looking for the artifacts that will lead us to the people involved in the creation of the malware. And so, in essence, we're archaeologists. And oddly enough, I did not practice archaeology as a profession, but here we are in InfoSec actually practicing archaeology. And so somehow college has something to do with my career. Before that, also architecture. So I do security architecture as well. So I'm really an architect and an archaeologist. Exactly what I went to school for, but for totally, one's in the dirt and the other ones are computerized.
Are you still paying off the student loans?
No.
Oh, okay, good.
No issues there.
All right. So
you wouldn't call yourself a malware coroner. It's more of malware has been here, so you're looking for its remnants, right?
Yeah, I'd be a malware coroner if I got called into somewhere like Target or Home Depot.
So corners like incident response, you're the archaeologist looking for the junk after the fact. I wanted to ask you about some of the new malwares that have come out recently, if you've had any experience dissecting those. You mentioned artifacts. Those are also called indicators of compromise in this case?
Correct.
So have you had any interesting malware recently that you've been seeing?
I'm seeing a big uptick in the use of PowerShell, the utility language and/or thing we call the post-exploitation kit of Windows.
Mm-hmm.
And PowerShell's convenient for the hackers because if they can execute a PowerShell shell, they can utilize all the .NET infrastructure to do all kinds of things. In this particular case, this was a Word doc taking advantage of an O-Day in Office that initially, as the campaign went out, successfully bypassed the scripting, you enable editing the document setting that you have to do in Windows when there's anything embedded in it. Bypass that, auto executed, gave you a real generic page, dropped a batch file, a VB script file, and a PowerShell script file, thus launching a PowerShell backdoor. And even after you killed Word, it remained running. I find that to be quite clever in regards to, and there were some oddities about how they obfuscated by using a batch file to create a BB file to create a PowerShell file, all deleted very quickly, but they used variables to assemble the names. So if you looked inside or strung out any of the individual files for like the batch file, are there any VBS files in here? You wouldn't find them because they broke it up into pieces and assembled it as they ran it on the command line. That I think clever for something commodity wise, and PowerShell's for the most part out of the box in a Windows environment is zero logging, so it's a great way to hide what they do. And unless you're a log-aholic like myself, looking for those kind of tidbits can be quite of a challenge. But my lab's pretty good, and I was able to execute this malware, harvest the malware, and execute the malware, and see this behavior and look at it, what it did, where it went, and I was like, damn, this is better than most I see.
Right on. Right on. So you are not very complimentary. You don't think PowerShell is very good in this case because is it insecure from a default setting and needs to be, we had Mick Douglas on a couple weeks ago. Actually, it was last week. We had part 2. And he was talking about how the benefits of PowerShell and how it's becoming more used. Is there a way to harden PowerShell without losing the functionality of PowerShell or the versatility?
I think you don't really harden it. What you're doing is setting up the environment so that it starts logging properly. There's the concept of transcripts. One of the things I'll be releasing here in the near future is the Windows PowerShell logging cheat sheet to help people know what to enable in PowerShell systems that they're going to use PowerShell extensively, which is pretty much everything moving forward with Microsoft, to collect the data that you need. So if your people are using PowerShell, which they are, your admins are using it in Exchange, or using it in SQL Server, the bad guys are using it, you want to be able to try to capture as much as you can about what's going on with PowerShell, get that into your event management solution, whatever you want to use, and start looking for these kinds of behaviors. Admins executing a PowerShell script to manage Exchange, to parse, or basically archive mailboxes is very deterministic. Malware people are not. They're going to be poking and prodding and running commands that aren't normally run by admins. So you want to capture that. Now, unfortunately, one of the reasons I'm not a fan of PowerShell is Microsoft's done a terrible job of locking it down. Meaning, if you run PowerShell and you have an execution policy set so that you can't execute a PS1 script, for example, you can easily bypass that. And that's kind of lame. You put something in place to create a restriction so that people can't run scripts, but yet on the command line, you can just type in minus execution policy space bypass, and it doesn't matter what the policy is, it'll be bypassed. Now, that's a great thing for us as defenders because we can log for that. And if you ever see that being executed, you have a compromise, period. Don't even pass go take that system offline and or reprimand the text trying to get around your restrictions. If you set up a profile to record, and another flaw with PowerShell is you actually have to, in your default profile, obviously do it for all users, not the individual user profiles that exist. There's too many profiles for PowerShell, should be one. Lock that down so it cannot be bypassed, because in that you have to set 2 variables in order to capture the command line that gets executed within PowerShell. That too, on the command line, is bypassed by simply typing no profile. And so that is a great example where Microsoft implements these great admin capabilities, but yet along with it include the pwnage capability and make it very easy for the Malwarians to take advantage of you. Though fortunately, if someone does type that in my environment, I'm going to catch those commands being executed. So ninja tip, definitely log for process creation 4688 anything PowerShell, anything minus execution policy, anything with the word bypass, anything with the word no profile. Because if those are occurring, yeah, somebody's doing something they're not supposed to, for sure.
Okay.
Most companies, would you think, don't even need PowerShell, right? I mean, because it wasn't a thing, a few years ago. So can we just shut it off?
Not really. It's built into the OS now, and it's becoming a core. It's a core piece of 2012. When you launch a command window in 2012, it's PowerShell. The first thing I do when I do that is I type in CMD enter, drop back into basically a normal command shell. So PowerShell is built in. Windows 8, same thing. Windows 10 is going to be much more embedded. A lot of improvements of the things I'm talking about will be in the new Windows 10. I'm looking forward to what ends up getting shipped there, but I've read some advanced security stuff on that, fortunately shared to me. I won't talk about that because, again, it was shared with me before release. But I'm looking forward to those improvements because it'll help us defenders. It's interesting that Microsoft includes so many of these capabilities, but they're all off by default. But yet all the capability to bypass these things are all there by default. So that's really puzzling to me, and that's why we have a love-hate relationship. Windows makes us a great career, but also gives us a lot of headaches.
Well, that's typical with most applications or devices. I mean, when you get a router or a Linksys router, HTTP is enabled, HTTPS isn't enabled. If you're using things like OpenWrt, you've got to enable all the security features because security, they don't want it to break anything or have some kind of undesired operation. So, and plus they may harden it to the point where a normal organization may not want to have that security profile. I think it's becoming more and more where people actually need that regardless of what their vertical is. It's just surprising. They give you the option to secure it instead. It's more like the opt-in, opt-out thing. You want it to be as secure as possible and then maybe release the restrictions instead of it being totally unrestricted and then locking it down.
Yeah, PowerShell there should be no way to bypass it. Microsoft should take that out of the product completely so that if you're going to run PowerShell, which we're going to have to in the future, it's becoming the norm. It's going to become the way you admin Windows moving forward, that it should be auto-logging. It should be like Windows is in the security log or system log, but yet turn these things on that Microsoft has put in there and they utilize themselves. And those of us who do, advanced active defense and blue teaming and all that and IR, the first thing, Betcher and I have had many conversations about this. The first thing I do when I want to talk to somebody, hey, can you help me with this problem or that problem? I think my system's compromised. Is what are your base log settings to? There was an oil gas company that asked us to do some IR work, and my first question to him was, well, do you have any logging settings turned on whatsoever? No, we really don't. And that is, again, the basics, right? So this stuff should be on by default, collecting locally. No one, Microsoft's not telling you or making you force it up to a SIM like Splunk or ArcSight or whatever. But why don't they collect it locally? Disks are no longer small. CPUs no longer slow. Logging is just not noticeable. So this stuff should be turned on so that when a company like Target, Home Depot, retail happens, I should not have to worry about, oh, great, these things are not going to be turned on that I need to see. I should be able to know that when I go in there, this stuff is there and available for me to read. I think the Verizon DBR reports over the years focused on the fact that when we got there and looked at the logs, 80% of the breach was right there in the logs and no one's looking at them. I would say Microsoft needs to do a far better job turning on all the stuff that we've been, telling admins to turn on by default because there's no reason not to. And they use it, so why don't they make us use it?
Sure. So when you're doing Windows forensics, is there a specific method to how you do Windows forensics? Because we have a list of 12 things that apparently the group over at SANS does with regard to doing Windows forensics. They break them down into automated, semi-automated, and manual processes.
So hang on. What we're referring to is the SANS just released a new poster, a new version of their poster, Windows Forensics. What's it called?
Windows
Let me open
Forensics
that sucker up.
Evidence DFIR. Windows Forensics DFIR. It's like the SANS 408 class condensed into.
And it says
The
finding
Windows
unknown
Forensics
malware
and
step by step.
Yeah.
yeah, Windows Forensics Analysis poster.
So before the
So-
podcast, you said you weren't exactly a fan of how this is. You said it was kind of outdated.
Yeah,
Maybe you could-
I think it's seriously outdated. So, well, step one, right? I get these things, and usually SANS posters. I've loved. I have SANS posters from back in the early 2000s. Some of them are fantastic, and the concept of what they're trying to do with it is fantastic. It's sharing of data, and that's a great thing. But if you, and I would recommend everybody do this, is go listen, and hopefully it's still online somewhere. Maybe you can reach out to SANS and they can send you a link. But they initially, when the SANS DFIR in Monterey occurred last year, give or take, they had an exercise. John Strand was the pen tester, and they had people there like Lenny Zeltzer and Lissa Torres, and they went from John pen testing the environment, hacking, being the criminal hacker, to the very first thing that kicked off the DFIR part of the exercise was they got a call from a 3-letter agency telling them this IP was broadcasting and compromised and broadcasting information. What's missing there? The reports say that 80% or more of breaches occur being told to you by a third party. That means you are not detecting your own breach. They didn't cover discovery or detection in any way, form, or manner. That's a great example of where they kind of jump into what they're training, but they don't really prep you to get there. And this poster is similar. Step one, prep evidence, data reduction. Carve and reduce evidence. A lot of you guys, obviously, you've seen me present. I was up there in Seattle, beside Seattle, doing stuff as well, and it's great. Gather hash lists from similar systems, right? And I promote that. We call it a master file repository. But what's missing here is there's no discussion of prep. What's your goal of this Windows Forensics? Is law enforcement going to be involved? Is speed or return of business important? I would venture to say that 80% of us doing this kind of work, even if we have a formal CERT or group of incident responders, our goal is speed to return to business. I think it's one of the number one charters. We do not have a lot of time. So our process that we have to go through to analyze a system or systems to determine whether or not this thing is something we should delve much deeper into or take offline and put on the shelf for us to delve into later with traditional forensics should be a goal here, right? It is not necessarily triage to fix a problem, but it is a very fast summary analysis that I need to gather a certain amount of information that allows me to do certain things. Give me a probable answer of whether or not the system's infected or not, something I could potentially use to ask the entire organization if you have this condition, if you have a product that can do so. And that's a real important part. So gathering a hash list should be a prep item. It should be, I need to say, look, I'm a typical Windows 7. I got some Windows 8. I've got these, imaging processes. So I'm going to build me a couple of these VMs, and I'm going to hash them, and I'm going to keep those things up to date. And that's the thing I'm going to use when I do have to do forensics. So prepare for that. Cost and time. We all have other things to do. So time is money. And we all complain about how we're understaffed. So that needs to be taken into account. So speed, feeds into this. You've got to be able to analyze a system fairly quickly. And determine whether or not your organization really wants to go to traditional forensics. And when your decision point says, I'm going to go down digital forensics traditionally, or I'm going to do what's sometimes called sniper forensics, or I call malware archaeology, or I'm going to take a speedier path. Their next item is carve and extract all the EXE and DLLs. But the next bullet below that is mount evidence image read only mode. So they're inserting old traditional forensics here. The reality is we don't do that in the real world. We go to the systems that are live, running, they're in production. A lot of companies have systems that cannot be taken down, and you are going to analyze these systems while they're running. Workstations, you might have some more flexibility, but for the most part, your job as a malware archaeologist, a IR person, a malware researcher, whatever, is going to be looking at live systems very quickly. I am not going to do a digital copy. I'm not going to go down the read-only path unless something tells me that I need to do so. My process, my legal requirements, state agencies might have to do more criminal stuff than other companies. Some companies are like, well, when you get to the point you think this is an internal issue, then maybe we're going to start taking some drives and sticking them on the shelves to image them later. And that process has to be developed before you ever start the process of Windows forensics, in my opinion, because you need to know how fast I can get this done. And I say your first iteration through this is look at the system, get what you need out of it within 1 hour. And that's what I think is missing in step one here is a fast prepare initially, right? I have a lab box. It has all the tools, that needs to be talked about. And so my steps getting to the point where I even get started are far different than the SANS item, but that's just one example.
So you're saying the SANS is a more traditional kind of a model, so it's for physical boxes. So does this necessarily work the same way for AWS instances or Azure instances, or if you're running Zen or something? I mean, obviously with those you could just take a snapshot and continue on, right? So you take more than an hour to do some kind of forensic investigation, right? On Windows or Linux in this case.
Yeah, and depending on how big your VMs are, how long does that snapshot take? If you're doing a traditional DD on a terabyte drive, yeah, you're not doing anything in an hour, let alone 3. So, that has to be taken into account in regards to the process in which you're going to go do this Windows forensics. And I think there really needs to be a decision point where am I, do several of these things and then take that decision point. Am I going to do traditional forensics where this poster might be more relevant, and maybe that's their focus here, but there's no explanation of that. Remember the posters used to be dual-sided and have lots of instructions and everything. This one lacks that. But yeah, there's definitely, I think, a much needed direction of a faster forensics method known as sniper forensics, I think coined by Trustwave or whatnot, where you try to get through some well-known things very quickly to try to process, okay, I found something that I can put in this other tool I have to see if, how many of these systems have this condition. An example would be, okay, lots of people clicked on this email. It's got the PowerShell backdoor. Okay, can I analyze this fast enough to find something that I can go ask? It pinged China to 1.1.2.2. Okay, let me go to the Splunk or whatnot. Look for what systems visited 1.1.2.2 in a ping ICMP, and okay, I now know these people actually opened the PowerShell script. So I need to get information out of this analysis fast so I can ask the question of my tools to find out how big of a problem I may or may not have before I ever get into the deep dive.
Looks like, as I'm reading the poster, it's more like they've got patient 0 and they have to have a pristine computer that they can do, like they can spend days on this computer sifting through hand by hand memory analysis and all that. This doesn't seem like a 1 or 2 hour engagement to me, the way they list all the things that you'll need to do.
Would this be like an 80-20 thing? This is the 20% of forensics that you would need to do for like a major ownage, like a Dooku, if you will, or a Stuxnet kind of thing to look for everything necessary?
Yeah, normally what we do is if you kind of have an idea when you find out what's happened, and some indicator points you to that being patient 0 or patient less than 10, and you start basically grabbing those hard drives and you just kind of like tell people rebuild these and I'm putting this aside. And maybe you get one of your guys working on it to do your sniper forensics to see what kind of data they can get, and you may spend the time to actually DD the drive or take a snapshot of the VM or whatnot. But for the most part, I think this is more of the traditional mechanism that all this other work has already occurred, and this is that 20% that Betcher alluded to. And that's not the reality of how a lot of us do this. We don't have time. I mean, the second item, step 2 on their list is antivirus checks. I'm sorry, but that is just not something I rely on in any kind of forensics. I've got email gateways, I got web gateways, I've got antivirus on my endpoints. Why would I be scanning for viruses again? I would not waste my time. My process would include at some point sending the hash up to something like VirusTotal to see if they know anything about it. If I get to that point, and that tells me a lot. If VirusTotal doesn't know anything about it, yeah, I've got something, because that's generally what we're looking for. Or if it's a commodity malware that's a campaign, it'll light up like a Christmas tree. Day 1, it'll have 5 hits. Day 3, it'll have 20 hits.
So you're
Well, this
actually
probably has more like a consultant. You go into a company and you start with step 1, go to step 2, because you don't know if they've done these things or not, right?
Yeah,
Typically, your DFIR is going to work for a different company, because most places can't afford to have a dedicated forensics guy, right?
correct. And most people don't. Only about 20% do. I mean, if you look at the who reported your breach, the TrustWave report, I think, stated roughly 81% was told to you by a third party. So that means roughly 19 or 20% of us are good enough to detect it ourselves. So let's assume those people have good forensics departments. That's not a very big audience that this poster is really referencing to. These posters should be to everybody to help everybody do this. And I would not teach a class of trying to get people started to the point where they could do some basic analysis with these steps. I wouldn't do it.
All right. Well, let's go on to step 3, indicators of compromise search. I mean, is this something you would do? Search for indicators of compromise? It seems like it would be. Like you're looking in certain directories for certain executables, right?
I do. Not really sure quite how to read this. So you got a file name, I guess. It's got a hash. Okay. You may utilize fuzzy hashes if you want. And then there's an or and an and the file path contains Windows System 32, or the file size is greater than or equal to. Yeah, file size? Yeah, never going to look there. Directories, somewhat important. System 32, kind of a bad example. DLLs will be dropped there, but there's so many files there that it's really hard to filter that for the beginner. I would say, a better example would be the WBEM directory where WMI lives in Windows. You drop a DLL in there, and DLL injection is going to load automatically when WMI stops and starts. And that DLL, that calls the bad DLL that's in WBM will call another bad DLL that's in System 32. But yes, there are areas you look for. Service host, yeah, I'm not really looking for service host. I'm looking for a service host that is not loaded by services. So if you look at the hierarchy of how services are loaded, I'm interested in service host or any name of anything that doesn't have a parent. For example, the PowerShell example I started with, its parent was Word. So when Word started, then below that was a batch file with CMD window, right? Command window. Below that was C script. Below that was PowerShell. And when I closed Windows or Word, then that has now no parent. So it's a parentless child. And that's a pretty easy thing to script and look for. And that's the kind of stuff I would look for as an indicator, more so than worrying about service names being called service host or, SCV host or some misspelling of some sort. But yes, you look for things. Some of this is art. I think there is some logic and understanding user space versus, admin space when you're doing forensics, sniper forensics. Are you a general user? Yes. Okay, I'm going to focus on the users directory. See users, username, app data, local low roaming. I'm going to focus there, right? That's missing from here. And so that kind of stuff. So indicators, yes, we look for. Compile time, yeah, malware's packed. I'm not going to be there until later. Certain keys, pretty automatic to look for certain keys, tools that can do that. Auto runs, for example, sysinternals tools, Mark Rusinovich. That's what I would mention here, right? Tool set. That's why it's very important to prepare. And that's, my step 1 is create a master file repository. That's in their step 1. My step 2 is the tool set. I want to have the CD, DVD, thumb drive, hard drive, whatever, my lab, all having this tool set that we use to find these kinds of things, whether they're scripts I write or whether it's SIGCheck or fuzzy hash or SHA-1 deep or whatever you're using. That has to be defined. That makes it so your steps can be repeatable, so you're consistent in the things you do. That's a real important step. You've got to have a good tool set up. If I find something, step 3 would be put it in a lab. They don't mention anything about the lab that all this forensics is done in here, or consider that. I'm more traditionally trained from CERT, Carnegie Mellon training, where you have a triage procedure, and that's kind of what I'm talking about. Is these kinds of things. And then step 4 is where you basically go through malware discovery, and that's where we're starting to look for the indicators in their step 3. So mine has a lot more prep and stuff to help people get started to be more effective at trying to deal with a basic AR to get to the point of traditional forensics.
So what kind of tools, other than you mentioned Splunk at least once there, I want to ask you about Splunk in a second. What other kind of tools do you use? Do you use Process Explorer? You mentioned Mark Rasinovich's sys internals. Is that what it was?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah,
so,
big fan of his stuff.
Okay. So what other kind of tools do you use other than Splunk and those?
My scripts are pretty important. Believe it or not, built in Windows. I'm a big fan of logging, as you guys know. I'm a log-aholic. Hello, my name is Michael. I'm a log-aholic.
Hey, Michael.
Hey, all right. Somebody got it right. And so one of the things I do in a lab or even in a machine that I'm going to be investigating is immediately the Windows auditing settings, and we can go as simply as following the Center for Internet Security benchmark. That's a good place to start. The logging cheat sheet, the Windows logging cheat sheet that I make available at malwarearchaeology.com is a better place to start, because one of the things the CIS benchmark does not ask you to do is process creation success. And to me, that is like the number one thing everybody should be enabling in their logs. So I would turn on these logs. That is a tool. I would turn on the Windows firewall, and if you are in a place where it's disabled, we don't use it, server or workstation, doesn't matter. I would put it in any mode. I would increase the log size, right? Windows security logs got to be much bigger, because as you turn the stuff on, you'll rotate your logs, and then the data you're looking for will just roll out. Right? First in, first out, boom. So you turn this stuff on, you increase your logs. I think you guys have seen my talk where I have a batch file that I talk about. The settings I talk about are in the Windows logging cheat sheet. And you turn this stuff on a box you're investigating. You start collecting this stuff. So if the Windows firewall, the one thing that really is cool about Windows firewall logging is if in a lab I execute malware.exe to see what it's doing, the Windows firewall will tell me malware.exe communicated ICMP or TCP or UDP or DNS or whatever to these IPs. I now can get the association between the communication of that malware to an IP. So in an environment where you don't use the Windows firewall and you don't want to use the Windows firewall, Microsoft gives you the ability to enable it if your GPO is set up correctly. Another ninja tip: do not set your Windows firewall policy in your default profile. You need to have it outside that in a different GPO so you can drag and drop systems. And set it to any. It'll be on, no blocking, no nothing, but you log this great data. And it's awesome for an incident response scenario where I can look at the executables that are running, see what IPs they're talking to. And that's a cool tool. I use that extensively in the lab when I explode a piece of malware, the Word doc when I opened it. And then I can go in, I clear the log out. I'm like, okay, explode my malware. And then boom, there's the malware executing. I can see process 4688. There's its launching. Okay, Windows Firewall says it pinged to China, 1.1.2.2. Awesome. Now I have a piece of information I can take to log, SIM management, manual, however you want to do it, and I can look for that across the company. Hopefully, if my logs and my routers and my egress are all logged. And I can now see potentially who was infected with that item without any further analysis. The malware will then obviously reach out to a CNC. I will catch that as well with the Windows Firewall log. So that's a big tool that I don't think people really understand how valuable that is. Even in a case where a system's already compromised, enable this and start collecting that communication. Really important. But the sysinternal is huge fan. Process monitor, if you install it and the malware does not look for that condition and block you, and you set it into reboot mode, when you reboot the box, as things load, as clever as the malware may be, and another podcast we'll have to walk through one of the clever malwares that this became useful, is it will record everything that is occurring from kernel start to system initiation. So if there is a funky, hidden, super secret piece of malware where they've compromised one of your management softwares, tweak the exe to read the registry, pull this payload out of the registry, decrypt it, drop it to disk, and they've tweaked another service that looks for that file, but it's not there because you looked there already. During the boot process, this occurs, and Process Monitor helps you find that condition. Really powerful tool, but when you boot up. So I definitely utilize that. Process Explorer, that was a great tool. I could easily see the WinWord, Command Shell, C Script, PowerShell tree there. Phenomenal tool. SigCheck, another one. Strings, another one. Auto runs, another one. The sysinternal tools are hugely valuable to us defenders and incident responders.
Okay, you said even if the computer's already been infected, turn these logs on, you're going to see, for example, the any in the Windows firewall. You're going to see it try to connect back to command and control. And then if you reboot the box, you could see indicators of compromise when the malware tries to establish persistence and re-execute during boot up. Those logs will capture that activity.
Correct. So if you have the ability of looking at that locally, whether it's through a log parser or some other clever logging utility that knows what to look for, hint, hint, future discussion, that is really powerful to you because you're not altering the system from the Malwarians' perspective. They probably already ran NetSH to get the status of the Windows firewall. They may not care if it's up and running because a lot of malware is engineered to look for certain conditions. Okay, and that's in the case of this WinWord. Why do you think they pinged 1.1.2.2? Because they were looking for that to succeed. If they did, they know that the Windows firewall is not running. And so they can have logic in their code to take certain actions, right? So turning this on and leaving it wide open, but the data you collect is really cool. And if you reboot, remember, malware also has timers, whether it's 2 minutes, whether it's 30 days. And if you reboot, it's probably going to show itself for a split second in the course of rebooting, and you'll catch that potential, hey, I'm back. Because they have self-destruction capability as well. And so you're trying to gather as much information very quickly to hopefully utilize your other tools you have to find who else might have this condition. Phishing campaigns, it's really important as a malware analyst and incident response to figure out what that phish did. Drop it in a lab, you harvest it out of email. It's one of the easiest things you can harvest, and find some indicator that you have a tool for that you can look for. You could have SSCM and add something to your inventory that will painfully run on the entire disk, and then run that throughout your organization to find out if you can find that thing. You got Splunk. You can potentially log for a CNC connection, or you can log for a specific process that launched as a part of this. Hey, PowerShell never runs on our workstations. How many workstations ran PowerShell today or yesterday since we got this email? We know it happened between 7 a.m. and 12 p.m. So who launched PowerShell between those times? Maybe those are the systems we need to go look at. And you pull that information out very quickly, and you act upon it.
You spend all this time on Windows forensics and Windows logging, and I'm sure there's people out there going like, well, what about Linux? Is it just because Linux is so much easier to audit that you don't spend time on that? Or is it because there's more Windows in the enterprise and most of the end users have very little security knowledge or training, so it's just easier to infect the Windows boxes?
Yeah, one word, users. 80-20 rule. The majority of your systems are Windows-based. That's the reality. There's not much difference in regards to how you treat Windows versus Linux. The difference, obviously, is in the way you log. Linux does not have event codes. If I was to make a great suggestion to people writing applications, put event codes in your applications. Make it really easy for us to look for conditions. That would be awesome. But Linux, you have to look for Bob logged in, or Bob failed to log in, or daemon such and such, or Bob launched this daemon. You're not looking for 4688 success. Windows is really advantageous because there's numbers you can associate activity to, but it's the user. Bottom line is users get emails, they click on stuff. Users surf, they click on stuff. Your Linux boxes that aren't user-based, your non-user-based system servers and whatnot are going to get infected from the application space. That malware's moving up, right? That's the O-days and the shell shocks of the worlds and the poodles and all the various nonsense that's going to impact the application layer. that's where those boxes get compromised, right? Struts vulnerability is going to come out, and you're going to get a rootkit on your box. Much harder to hide, much easier to hide really well on Linux than it is in Windows. So you've got to do some due diligence, but the process is basically the same.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a script that I run to look for rootkits on Linux. If I don't find that condition, you can look at some tertiary things to say, did anything weird happen here? You got a lot of additional files. Any of the config, and again, Linux has flat file configs, and Windows has the registry, a big flat database where you can store, quarter meg of malware files built in, and hidden in a great way. Different ways of looking at things, but it is because the users that the focus is on Windows, and it is where most most companies get compromised, short of coming in through a failed application.
Mm-hmm. So with Windows forensics, you that's your bailiwick. But there's a lot more companies now trying to deploy iDevices and MacBooks. Is it the same kind of logging functions there with Linux, or is it more on the same side of Windows where you can look at those log files, or are they very much in the same vein as Linux where you've got to do searches and it's kind of a pain in the ass for you there?
It's a little more of a challenge. Pretty much, Macs is a NIX-based system, so it's going to be very similar to NIX. The logs are roughly the same. They have the same kind of logic. Wording is going to be different, but they are kind of the same. So you treat them the same. I also do NIX stuff. It's just that it's just not the thing that most of us focus at because there's no users, generally speaking. Unless you let your users surf on servers, that would be a really bad idea.
Right. And plus, nobody wants to see what's in front of a Linux user's webcam either. That's why there's no
webcams
malware.
work on Linux. Wow.
Yeah.
Who knew?
There's lots of stuff you can do on Linux.
Yeah. So when you've got all this stuff and you've done all your incidents of compromise and stuff, it must be nice to do some kind of attribution, right? So that you can point fingers at who the bad guys are and get a repertoire of I'm not saying it's China, but it was definitely China. Like today, we're recording this on June 10th, and it just came out today that basically Kaspersky Labs was infected with what they call Dooku 2.0, and we got a link to that article in the show notes. But it was interesting that Kaspersky himself did not point fingers at anybody, which is kind of, I don't know, it's kind of odd in this day and age. Everybody wants to point fingers, whether it be China or whether it be a nation state, or if it's Russia, or if it's a hacktivist group. Do you like being able to do that, or do you think that attribution is kind of overrated?
I think it's a dangerous thing to do. First off, anybody who's good enough to do APT could easily, let's say the NSA. Let's pick on the NSA. If you were the NSA, would you not try to make whatever you did? Well, let's simplify it. If I was going to launch a campaign against somebody, how would I do it? I would get a laptop, whatever I got. I would get some disposable network card. I would go into a Starbucks, nowhere near where I lived, probably in a city that I traveled through and drove through, so there's no real record of me being there. And I would press that button and launch my bad juju, and I would leave, making it look like it came from there, not from where it really came from.
Sure.
The Chinese government, because of the Great Firewall of China, has some protections in regards to how they can hack at us. But I think we underestimate that. It's real easy to make it look like Betcher compromised you versus me doing it. And NSA is probably just as good. Let's use the Brazilians for this one. And so you may be poking the wrong bear, and I don't think it's a good idea to poke the bear. I think what you do, like in the case I've been involved a couple of these, is you meet with the guys with the 3-letter agencies and you turn over all the data that you have and you let them worry about it. Even the largest companies don't have the power to go over to China, Russia, Bulgaria, Ukraine, Romania, wherever this stuff may be coming from, and arrest people. It is going to be a concerted effort of us turning over the information to the proper authorities, letting them learn on it as well. I think a big gap in InfoSec is the inability of industries to share information with one another. So if the retail industry, for example, if Target had shared more openly with the retail industry what had happened to them, Home Depot, just by reading the Eyesight Partners report in January, Home Depot got compromised, in July that year. That's 5 months that Home Depot should have been able to prepare. And so the industry should do a better job within one another in the retail space, large retail especially, to say, hey, look, this is everything we learned about what happened to us. Holy crap, here's what you should do. And if I was on that team, I would have said, look, guys, go turn on these logs. And in the case of Black POS and all the variants since, look for the installation of a new service. Do that first, and then start turning on this other stuff. That would have saved a lot of retailers massive pain. They still would have got compromised, but in theory, they would have been able to detect it quicker. That sharing information, I think, we have to feed through our federal agencies. I think it's the best bet. Do I really want to screw with the people actually hacking me? I'm just going to cut them off. Do I really want to start attacking them? Come on. I have personal experience where an industry I worked in, very heavily compromised by the Chinese because there's high profit in it. They will purchase legitimate server hosting time, jump around those hosting companies like nobody's business, automate all the hell out of it using compromised credit cards to possibly real credit cards. So the origin of attack is coming from U.S. servers. You start doing retribution against U.S. servers to a hosting company, you're going to find yourself in court and totally not achieving what you were trying to achieve. So collect the data. Don't waste your time. Give it to the authorities. I've had quite friendly experiences with them. Develop a relationship with them. Encourage them to share it with your partners. Talk to your industry individuals. Try to share it with them, and try to bridge that gap with your management, saying, I need to share this ponage I found with my other industry members and share it because they're going to get compromised. What was the Verizon report? What was it? It took less than 24 hours for a company. If an industry is being targeted, let's pick on retail because I think that's what they're referring to. It took less than 24 hours for the bad actors to compromise company B. Less than 24 hours. In some cases, less than that. So if they're moving around these organizations that quickly, you're sharing that information and trying getting out to your equivalent industry, I think is where all your effort should be. Screw the retribution and retaliation. Take the data, share it, and try to get your management to give it to your competitors and or colleagues of sorts.
Well, I was thinking more just attribution because it seems like everybody who gets breached, they always want to try to point a finger. I don't know if it's because of media deflection instead of saying, everybody, being on the media, pointing their fingers at, who got hacked. It's about who hacked them instead of who got hacked. And, instead of saying, okay, yeah, it happened, it's going to be fixed and it'll probably never happen again. Everybody's worried about which country did it or which nation state or which did the equation group do it or did, was it a lizard squad, break in or whatever. It just seems like the media and the companies want to deflect from what happened so that
it's someone else's fault.
Yeah. So it's somebody else's fault. We didn't do it. It was sophisticated. We never would have saw it coming.
Yes, you should, and yes, you could, and we need to spend our efforts towards detection and quit dealing with all this other stuff. I don't care who pulled the trigger. They're a criminal. They may or may not be in the United States. That's for the FBI to figure out. Look, I'm going to announce it. I'm going to say, look, my defenses were weak. Sorry, Target CEO. Lots of people get bounced when these things occur. Great and dandy. Don't waste your time pointing fingers. The problem is, and I think the Verizon report points this out, or the Trustwave report, or both. It's the gap of skills that it's widening. Our ability to detect what they're doing is widening, and our focus should be at that area. Another indicator is that of 2014, I just read the stat. Jack Daniel had mentioned something about this, so I read specifically try to interpret what that really meant. In 2014, of the CVEs that were released, half of them had been exploited within 2 weeks. less than a month. So that means the amount of time we have to react to things is significantly dropping. It used to be that these CVEs wouldn't be exploited for over a year. So that window has shrunk so fast that what are you going to go around and patch everything? Okay, it takes time for people to test, move to stage, move to production. If 2 weeks is your window before things are compromised, you better be really good at detection. Quit pointing fingers. The fingers should be pointing at yourself to improve what you can do, and you can do it. It isn't that hard. It just takes a little focus.